Here we are. Someone's here. Hello. Thanks for joining me, whoever you are. Tonight I wanted to talk about who are you? You want to tell me who you are? If not, no problem. Tonight I wanted to talk about doctrine. I was reading a very interesting passage today in Titus, where Paul talks about doctrine, and he gives us a pretty. Braden, how's it going, my friend? Yeah, we should talk soon. Sorry, it's been a while since we spoke. Anyway, I was reading Titus today, and Paul has this very interesting. Hello, Daniel. This very interesting passage about doctrine. And usually, when we think about Christian doctrine, we think about like Christology and what someone's position is on eschatology, dispensationalism and soteriology and things like that. Beliefs about the faith that don't really cost us much to hold, but listen to what Paul says about doctrine. It's very interesting. It's in Titus chapter 2, the beginning of the chapter. He says, he says, but as for you, teach what accords with sound doctrine. So he's just given us the context there. He's just started this new thought, right? Teach what accords with sound doctrine. Older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith, in love, and in steadfastness. Older women likewise are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good, and so train the young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind and submissive to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled. Likewise, urge the younger men to be self-controlled. Show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works, and in your teaching show integrity, dignity, and sound speech that cannot be condemned, so that an opponent may be put to shame, having nothing evil to say about us. Bondservants are to be submissive to their own masters in everything. They are to be well-pleasing, not argumentative, not pilfering, but showing all good faith. But showing all good faith. Just accidentally closed the Bible. But showing all good faith, so that in everything they may adorn the doctrine of God, our Savior. So, interesting passage. Paul launches into this discussion about doctrine, and you might think he's going to talk about the Trinity, or your view of Christ, or something like that, something that's more intellectual, uh, something that we believe. But he launches into a discussion about how we live. He talks a lot about self-control, sober-mindedness, love, steadfastness. Um, so it's an interesting passage, because so many, we're sort of conditioned to think of doctrine as primarily a theological thing. But at least in this passage, it's a lifestyle thing. And then you go back, to some other passages in the New Testament, and they sort of take on, a different meaning when you think of it like that. When you think of this word teaching or doctrine, um, through this lens of what we believe and what we teach about how we should live. So here's an example. 2 John, verse 9. Everyone who goes on ahead and does not abide in the teaching of Christ or the doctrine of Christ does not have God. Whoever abides in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. So there, you might ordinarily read that and think the teaching of Christ here is like proper Christology, maybe, or proper atonement theory, or something like that. It could include that, but in light of Titus 2, probably it primarily means, or at least includes, like the teachings of Christ, the commands of Christ, the principles of Christ, the Sermon on the Mount and these kind of things. That's the teaching or the doctrine of Christ that we need to remain in, that we need to, not run ahead and leave it behind. Another interesting passage, where people often quote it, but might think of it read it through a sort of theological lens, is in 1 Timothy chapter 4, where he says, keep a close watch, verse 16, keep a close watch on yourself and on the doctrine or the teaching. Persist in this, for by doing so you will save both yourself and your hearers. So, a lot of Protestants would read that and maybe think, when they think keep a close watch on your doctrine, they might think your soteriology. Make sure you don't start getting it into your head that your good works plays any role in your salvation or something like that. But perhaps Paul's thinking, keep a close watch on your life. Keep a close watch on what you're teaching people about what it means to follow Jesus. The example that you set. And how are you leading people to live as you disciple them? So we could talk about the doctrine of non-resistance, for example, or the doctrine of self-control, the doctrine of self-denial, the doctrine of non-accumulation, the doctrine of marriage, the doctrine of gentleness, the doctrine of humility. These are essential Christian doctrines. And eschatology and things like that are not so essential in comparison with these more essential doctrines of how our disciples to conduct themselves. Those are the things Jesus is going to be looking at primarily on the day when we have to stand before him. So anyway, that was basically what I had to share. Not a whole lot more to share. But if there's anyone watching who's a newer, recently subscribed to my channel, and you have Devin, how you doing, my friend? And you have, any questions or concerns or comments about any of the content, and you want to talk about it or whatever, ask questions or challenges or something, feel free. Correct. Sounds like teaching people to be Christ-like. That is exactly, that's a better way to put what I was trying to say. That's the doctrine. Brother Samuel Rogers, hello. Thank you for joining me. What is your question? Hopefully I have a decent answer. Oh, Devin, of course. Yeah, whatever you got to talk about, Devin, just put it in there. Whoever is joining, we're just waiting for, I just kind of gave my spiel. It's over. Sorry, it was short. I was just talking about how doctrine in the New Testament is often, maybe primarily, concerning how we live, the teachings of Christ and how we are to conduct ourselves as disciples. It was not a very long monologue. So now I just opened it up for any questions, comments, challenges, anyone who might have questions about any of the content on my channel if you're a newer subscriber. So, Brother Samuel Rogers said it's about baptism, meaning is it necessary to wash away our sins and allows us to die in Christ and raise with him? Yeah, that is kind of what the New Testament seems to say. It seems to say that baptism saves us, that regeneration happens, at baptism. We need to be born again of water and the Spirit. That's that's what it says. If you ask me, I think that it's not something that's very rigid. The guy on the cross, for example, or people who get martyred before they have the chance to. I just lost a bunch of people. People who get martyred before they have a chance to get baptized. Someone comes to faith, they become loyal to Jesus. But then they are martyred or die before they have the chance to be baptized. No, I don't think God just says, "Oh, sorry, too bad. If only you'd made it to the water." I don't think it works like that. I think he's merciful in situations where someone does not have the chance to be baptized. But yeah, I mean, I'm not can't explain away what the New Testament says about baptism. So, might have upset 3 people. We had 8 people. We're down to 5. Oh, we're back up to 7. That's cool. But is the nominal? Oh, yeah. Well, I think there's a lot of people who get baptized. Hello, dystopic. I think there's a lot of people who get baptized who have not been regenerated. I mean, baptism doesn't do anything for someone if they don't actually come to believe the gospel and become loyal to Jesus, sincerely. Baptism is not going to do anything for someone who's not really, uh, you know, hasn't given their allegiance to Christ. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of people who hear a false gospel. They think that all they need to do is believe the right things, repeat the right words, um, and they're saved, and then they get baptized, and nothing, that there's no genuine salvation that happens. Yeah, and I think there are other people who, something supernatural happens inside of them. They do become obedient to Christ. He becomes everything to them, and then no one even tells them they need to get baptized. And they figure it out later, reading the Bible. You know, it's just a big mess today. So, yeah, kind of a complicated issue, baptism in today's world. In today's Christianity, where there's so much confusion. So, okay, Devin, we know living Christ-like is the most important thing. So if someone is a Jehovah's Witness or a Mormon or an occult but is living Christ-like, can they be saved? Well, I think you have to have the right Jesus. You can't have a false Jesus. In the case of the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses, they think that Jesus is, something less than the Creator. They think he's Satan's brother, or the Archangel Michael. I'm a little. I think the Mormon, obviously, the Mormon concept of God is just completely not even in the realm of biblical Christianity, or couldn't even be. It's just in a totally different category, I think, than Jehovah's Witnesses, who are Arians. An Arian perspective is a little. You can understand how someone could reach that conclusion, if they're kind of focused on certain proof texts from the Bible and they're not really taking it all together. And you can understand that. And I'm open to the possibility. Like, I know there were a lot of Arians in the church, in the third century, when it sort of started to become big. There were a lot of people who were Arians, and they might have just been taught that in their church, and they were sincere and they were obedient to Jesus' commands, and they believed he was the Son of God who has all authority. And I'm not going to say that nobody like that is going to enter the kingdom in the end. But that is it makes me nervous. It makes me feel concerned. Mormonism is like, that's just completely off the rails. It's that, it's a different category. But yeah, I think, I don't think people in those sects generally do live like Jesus calls us to live. I don't think your average Mormon or Jehovah's Witness, while they might be very nice, they're very nice people. But there are certain commandments of Jesus where there's tremendous neglect, or what he had to say about wealth, what he had to say about marriage. In the case of Mormons, what he had to say about war, or love for enemies. Mormons are extremely nice, but when it comes to those three areas, I don't think that they're really that far away from Protestant evangelicals or, you know. Hello, H.Y. Grav. Thanks for your comments lately. Feel free to tell me your name if you want. Does that make sense, Devin? So like in Jehovah's Witnesses, I had a couple of conversations with Jehovah's Witnesses last year, and their view on wealth and possessions doesn't really seem all that different from your average Protestant Catholic. They've got a more serious view of non-resistance. That's great. Good to meet you, Jimmy. But Jesus calls us to something quite a bit more intense and costly than just being really nice, and going a little further than nominal Christianity, which is, I think, kind of where Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons tend to be at. Jesus calls us to something, an intensity and a devotion and a love and an uncompromising obedience to all of his commands. And if that's not there, then it doesn't really matter, what our Christology is. But anyway, yeah, sorry, I'm going on and on here. I think the Mormon Christology is a deal breaker. The Jehovah's Witness Christology is concerning to me, but I couldn't say that someone who's Arian is not going to enter the kingdom even if they're obedient. I could say I'm very concerned, but I'm going to leave that up to Christ. Okay. Whoops. All right, let's see here. Thanks for whoever recently joined. If you recently subscribed to my channel and you have any questions or disagreements with me, challenges, concerns about any of the content on my channel, and you want to talk about it, feel free to put your question or challenge or concern in the chat box here. All right, let's see. What did I miss here? Let's go back up here. Devin, someone is in. Okay. Hope you're doing well. CMG Igus. Thank you. Hope you are doing well as well. Did I answer your question, Devin? Is there more I should say? Brother Samuel Rogers said the doctrine of non-resistance and marriage permanence is a tough one to relate to people today. Yeah, that is a tough one. Very tough. Okay, Seek X Christ. Hey, brother, I have a question. Hello, my friend. My friend is trying to figure out the truth, but he believes that it only can come through authority, aka the Catholic or Orthodox Church. So what would you say? Well, I guess I would just say, why don't you just... Okay, so he already believes in Jesus. He already believes that he rose from the dead, that he's the Son of God, that he's going to come back to judge the world. Is that right? Because I think, he needs to just go back to the source, the teacher himself, which is Jesus. If he can at least agree that Jesus is not going to steer him in the wrong direction, he should be happy to, dive into the Gospels and let them change his life however they will. And I think that if he really familiarizes himself with Jesus' teaching, his example, what he was like, how he thinks about things, he is going to perceive a very big disconnect between what he sees in Jesus and in the apostles and what he sees in the Catholic and Orthodox churches. He's going to, I guess that's something that I would encourage him to do. I would say, hey, get really familiar with Jesus' teachings Learn the way he talks, the way he thinks, the way he lives, and let that be your guide in figuring out if these churches that claim to be the one true church are really the ones that you should listen to. Or is it possible that just like Jesus said, the path is narrow and difficult and only a few find it? Let me know what you think about that. Seek X Christ. Braden says we must submit to Jesus as he is in Scripture. Proper obedience to Jesus is believing his words about greed, wealth, merit, the judgment, and also his divinity, of course. Jimmy said you were trying to learn more about nonviolence, and some people use the scripture of Jesus and take up a sword. Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, seek X Christ. If you are interested, there's a playlist on my channel about it's for those who are considering the Orthodox or the Catholic Church. If you find that playlist and give it a listen, let me know what you think. Maybe it's designed to help people who are going in that direction to stop and think and to realize, wait a second, there's something very wrong here. It's not like the only churches that have some big blind spots are Protestant churches. So yeah, let me know what you think about it. Chris, like, are you my atheist friend who gets nonviolence and stuff, but you're not convinced that Jesus is the Son of God? Is that you? Okay, so yeah, Jimmy, the sword passage that people often use to try to get away from nonviolence is Luke 22. Here, let's just bring it up. Oh, wow. Daniel, someone said, because Jesus told Peter to put his sword back in its sheath, it means you'll need it later. That's very funny. I haven't heard that one before. Yeah, well, for some reason, Peter never seemed to take that sword back out in the book of Acts, even though there were lots of good opportunities for it. Maybe he forgot he had his sword. Or maybe he got rid of it because he realized all who take the sword will die by the sword. Okay, so maybe I'll just share my screen. Jimmy, I'll share my screen and then we'll look at Luke 22. Here we go. All right. Luke 22. We'll look at a couple different versions. Hey, Jimmy, what? Whoops. Let's get rid of that. Let's get rid of that real quick. Sorry, just gonna stop the notifications on my Chromebook here. Stop the notifications. Do not disturb. Okay. Okay, Chris, you're not an atheist. Sorry. Okay, your friends ask. Okay, sorry. All over the place here. Okay, how seek X Christ? You said, how do we know if our interpretation of Scripture is correct? Yeah, well, I think there is, like a lot of it is somewhat straightforward, and a good bit of it has some ambiguity to it. But when it comes to the really important things that Jesus taught about how his disciples are to live, there I think the scriptures are pretty straightforward. You can see you cannot just see what Jesus said, but you can see what he did, and you can see how the apostles in the early church put his teachings into practice. And then, of course, Jimmy, you're right, the Holy Spirit in the early church. If someone's heart is obedient to Christ and they begin, obeying what he says, Jesus says in John 14 that they will have the Spirit with them, and that he and his Father will make their home with them. And so, yeah, there's ambiguity in the scriptures, but when it comes to the things that are really important to Jesus, I think it's pretty clear, and if someone wants to check these things out, with the early church, they can do that. You can read the Sermon on the Mount, look at what Jesus says, like, wow, did he really mean that? And you can figure out, you can go back and do some research and look at how the early churches put those things into practice. And what you're going to find is that they did it very differently from how the Orthodox and Catholic churches do it today. They were deadly serious about Jesus' teachings and his commands, and that was, their serious application of the things Jesus commanded and the things his example showed them is what set them apart, from the world around them and made them so strange to the in Roman society. So yeah, just a plain reading of the text, an obedient heart that is willing and ready to just put whatever Jesus says into practice. You don't just hear it, but you do it. That person is gonna have the Holy Spirit guiding them. The early church, and can provide some guidance on some of these things. I think another good question to ask is what interpretation requires something of me, and what interpretation allows me to put down my cross. I think is a good question to ask. Hello, Layman Seminary. That you can go too far with that. Obviously, you can interpret things in a way that is more strict than what Jesus had in mind. For example, someone could cut your hand off or gouge your eye out too far and end up maiming themselves. And people have done that over history. But I think generally, people know what he means when he says those kind of things. Okay, yeah, Luke 22. Let's go to Luke 22. So, who am I answering this for? Jimmy, right? Is it Jimmy or yeah? Okay. Do you have a preferred? Translation? Does it matter? What's your preferred translation, Jimmy? Maybe CSB. All right, the CSB. Let's try the CSB. I'm not really too familiar with that, but whatever, it doesn't matter. They're all, All right, so Simon. Okay, verse 35. He also said to them, when I sent you out without money bag, traveling bag, or sandals, did you lack anything? Not a thing, they said. Then he said to them, but now whoever has a money bag should take it, and also a traveling bag. And whoever doesn't have a sword should sell his robe and buy one. For I tell you, what is written must be fulfilled in me. And he was counted among the lawless. Yes, what is written about me is coming to its fulfillment. Lord, they said, look, here are 2 swords. That is enough, he told them. So, yeah, a lot of people, particularly in evangelical circles, they look at where Jesus said, whoever doesn't have a sword should sell his robe and buy one. And then the disciples have swords. They have 2 swords, and he says that's enough. And they don't really give this any serious thought. They've got the Second Amendment in their mind. They've got, whatever the pastor has told them in their mind, and they read this passage through that lens, and they, don't think about, well, what did Jesus teach? Jesus has already taught non-resistance. He's already taught that if someone slaps you or punches you in the face, turn the other cheek. I'm sending you out like lambs among wolves. Love your enemies. Do good to those who abuse you. Pray for those who persecute you. Do not resist evildoers. He's spent the last 3 years under the threat of violence, has never armed himself or his disciples, has never threatened anyone who was threatening him. Even when they were picking up stones to stone him, he has been voluntarily defenseless. And then all of a sudden, it's like, just kidding. I want you to strap on some swords so that you can run someone through if they attack you. It's like, it's just, kind of a big change, in direction there very abruptly. They also don't maybe give a lot of thought to the example of the church in Acts, that the church is under the threat of violence, under persecution, and these swords that Jesus apparently said to get never come out. And which is weird, if he was giving them permission to defend themselves, there's no reason why they couldn't have done that in Jerusalem or around the Roman world. These people knew that God could defeat an army of thousands with a few hundred people or without anyone. And if it had been their understanding that they were to take up the sword to defend themselves, they could have slaughtered everybody. The church was, 10 or 15,000 strong in Jerusalem. After Peter's second sermon, I think in his first sermon, maybe 2,000, 5,000, 3,000. I don't know. The first sermon, it's a number of thousands. The second sermon, I think another 2,000 are joined the church. They've got all the manpower they need to come against the Sanhedrin and the temple guards and whatever forces they have at their disposal. But there's total non-resistance. The church scatters, they die, they go to prison, right? So, when you just think about that, it's like, okay, so how does this fit? How is it possible that Jesus is arming the disciples for self-defense here? And when you just, look at the passage and look at the context, you can see it's not about that. So he says, sell the robe and buy a sword. For I tell you, not I want you to get ready for self-defense, but he says, what is written about me must be fulfilled. And he was counted among the lawless. And he quotes Isaiah 53. And so he says this interesting saying about selling a robe or a cloak and buying a sword in connection with the fulfillment of the prophecy that he is going to be counted among the transgressors or the lawless. He's going to be considered a criminal. And it's in that context, that the fulfillment of that prophecy that he says this. And so whatever, he says this thing either because it could be because he thinks the swords will help bring about the fulfillment of the prophecy, or it could be that he's basically saying to them. So here are the two interpretations that I think are the most plausible. The first one is that the swords will be helpful for bringing about the fulfillment of this prophecy, that Jesus will be numbered among the transgressors, right? They bring out 2 swords, and he says that's enough. And that phrase, that's enough, tells you that he's not talking about self-defense, because 2 swords are not enough to defend all the apostles and the church against what's about to come against them, the persecution that's coming. 2 swords are not even close to enough. But 2 swords would be enough to give his enemies, some reason to accuse him. That's one way you could look at it. Another way to understand it is that he's speaking in figurative language. He's using a figure of speech. When he says, sell your cloak and buy a sword, he's using a figure of speech they had that would have been similar to us, a number of figures of speech that we have today that might signify that something serious is about to happen. For example, the stuff's about to hit the fan, something like that. Or another one that I've thought of is that the gloves are about to come off, or it's time to bring out the big guns. Those are a couple of examples of figures of speech that we use in our culture to signify things are about to heat up, things are about to get serious. And so Jesus is letting them know that, stuff's about to get real serious, and you need to be ready for something intense coming up. Sell your cloak and buy a sword. And they take that figure of speech too literally and bring out the 2 swords. And when Jesus says that is enough, he's not saying that's enough swords, to defend the church. But he's saying that's enough, as in enough of this. You're not understanding what I'm saying, guys. Let's just move on, and it'll make sense later. Part of the reason why I like this interpretation is that I just don't think he literally wants anyone to sell their cloak to buy a sword. There's no reason for anyone to have to do that. If you wanted to get a sword in that day, my guess is that you could do it without having to sell your cloak. I'm guessing the 2 guys who had swords already, they didn't have to sell their cloaks to get swords. And so I don't think Jesus literally intends for them to do that. Another reason why I think he doesn't literally intend for them to sell a cloak and buy a sword is because they take out 2 swords and he says, that's enough. But he just told them, whoever doesn't have a sword should sell his cloak and buy one. So when they take out 2 swords, Jesus, if he meant this literally, Jesus should say, okay, that's a good start, but there's 10 more of you I just said whoever doesn't have a sword, sell his cloak and buy one. So the other 10 of you, you need to go get swords too. Two is not enough, right? Whoever doesn't have one, get one. But he doesn't say that. So I think he's probably using figurative language here that they take too literally, because their mindset is still, we're going to go to war against Rome. And so when he uses this figure of speech, they're like, okay, finally, at last, it's time to take, it's time to go to war. This is what we've been waiting for, and Jesus is like, face palm, enough of this, moving on. So anyway, that's how I understand it. I think that's the most plausible interpretation. And yeah, I mean, if someone's got other ideas, fine. But the one interpretation that is just absurd is that Jesus is arming them for self-defense. And one problem with that, to keep in mind, is that often when you're talking with people who believe in self-defense, they'll say you can defend yourself as long as it's not in the context of persecution. If you're being persecuted for your faith, then you should be like Jesus and pray for them and don't go to war, don't fight. But if someone attacks you on the street for your wallet, if someone, just wants to do evil to you, it's got nothing to do with your faith, then you take out the swords Jesus was talking about and kill them if you need to. The problem here is that Jesus is clearly not, just making some random teaching about self-defense in some context other than persecution. He's talking about what's about to happen after he dies and rises and leaves. These guys need to be ready for what's coming, right? Obviously, they're going to be persecuted. They're going to be on the run. They're going to be having to stand before, rulers and kings, and they're going to be put to death, And so Jesus is talking about the coming persecution. And so the only way to maintain that this is about, self-defense without contradicting what Jesus has already said about loving your enemies and praying for those who persecute you, the only way to maintain that is to say Jesus is just giving them some kind of random teaching about self-defense, which has nothing to do with his mission, nothing to do with the faith, nothing to do with persecution. It's just this random, hey guys, by the way, nothing to do with you being apostles or the message you're about to preach. But if you're ever on your way to Jericho, for example, and some people, just want to, rob you and take your stuff or do something evil to you, strap some swords on just in case that happens. And as long as they're attacking you for some reason other than the fact that you're my followers, you can kill them. Okay, now back to the things concerning the faith. It just doesn't make any sense at all. So anyway, there's a long spiel. Let's go back to the chat box here and see. Just went on for a while here, so I missed some. Let's see. Okay. Already have the swords or knives as well. No need to even sell the cloak. Right. Yeah. The stuff like that. When you start thinking about if Jesus meant, to literally sell a cloak, it's just very weird. Why does Peter still have his cloak in Acts 12, when he goes to prison, and the angel comes to him and says, put your cloak on and follow me. Thought he was supposed to sell it and get a sword. Although you could argue, okay, he already had a sword, so maybe he was already cloakless. I don't know. It's just obviously not the point of the passage there in Luke 22. Jesus disarms him later. We see the example of the church in the book of Acts. We know that the pre-Nicene church was unanimously across the globe, non-resistant, non-violent. And that's the end of that discussion. So, Daniel, you agree with the figure of speech thing? Okay. Devin, thoughts unto death, sins unto death? Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure what John means. You've heard some interesting theories, not sure. Disciples with swords lack faith or understanding. They already had them. They already acknowledged they previously lacked nothing. So they misunderstood his statement, you think, and they took it literally, but he's using a figure of speech. That's what I think. Or he could be, Jimmy, it could be that he's using a figure of speech. They misunderstand it, take it too literally, because they're still in there, we're going to war against Rome mindset. Or it could be that he does want the swords present that night in order to give his enemies more reason to accuse him of being, a dangerous person, who's leading an uprising or something like that. The thing that doesn't make sense to me about that is that, he says, whoever doesn't have a sword, go sell your cloak and buy one. And so that kind of points me in the figure of speech direction, I'm not aware of, I've never read any early Christian commentary on the Luke 22 passage. All I know is that every single teacher, around the time of Nicaea and prior, all of them teach Christians do not go to war, or Christians do not use violence in self-defense. That was an essential, obvious teaching of the church. So whatever you want to do with Luke 22, it doesn't mean, go strap on a sword or a gun and get ready to kill your enemy if you need to. It's not. We would have to see that in Jesus' example or the example of the apostles in order to let Luke 22, which has a very specific context, overturn all of these things that Jesus taught in other places where he's clearly teaching and living nonviolence. My friend, is there anything else? Any other thoughts, questions about that? Seek X Christ. Are you still here? Seek X Christ. I think that this subject of non-resistance is a good thing to bring up with people who are considering Catholicism or Orthodoxy, because you can see in the early Christian writings, the ones who talk about this, that this is an essential teaching of the church. And there's no getting around the fact that the church, those churches that claim to be the one true church, have departed from what was in the beginning an essential doctrine, so that anyone who was not willing to give up the sword could not be baptized. And anyone who was a Christian who would become a soldier would be excommunicated. And the Catholic and Orthodox churches have obviously derailed from that severely. Yeah, thank you for that observation, Chris. These verses are surrounded by the disciples lacking faith, and finally Peter denying Jesus. So yeah, in this portion of the Gospels, this is where the disciples are clueless, and it's not um, surprising that Jesus would say something here and that they would take it the wrong way. And I wonder if we've lost our new friend, Seek X Christ. Correct. There is no such thing as holy war. Yeah, they didn't have the Spirit yet. They didn't understand what was going on. So anyway, well, we're down to 9. Anybody else got? What about people who work in the military but are cooks, janitors? I would think if someone is in the military but became saved, that they finished their time but don't pick up a gun. Yeah, I don't have like a really firm, position on that. I mean, I think it's best. Obviously, like the best thing would be to get out of the military so that you're not in any way participating directly with, um, it's a little awkward to be a mechanic who's like fixing the tanks that are going to go blow people up, or, fixing the planes that are going to bomb people or something like that. It's a little awkward to be a cook who's, feeding the people who are going to be doing that. Not saying that, these things are inherently sins or anything like that. It's just awkward. It's like one of those jobs that it's like, can this work? It's like being working in finance, where you're trying to help people, uh, you know, save up a whole lot of money so they can have a great retirement. It's like, this doesn't work for a disciple. Maybe I'm not saving up, but I'm kind of, encouraging others to do so. And how's this going to work? It's just not going to work. But I'm not saying that. And I think in ancient Rome, I think part of the reason, if I'm not mistaken, part of the reason, like, it was a much more serious thing. You couldn't just get out of the army. Leaving the Roman army could come with some really severe penalties. And a lot of what Roman soldiers did were, neutral things like building roads and, public service things like that. So you could be in the Roman army and never have to go to war. But it's easier to get out of the army now. You're not going to be put to death. You're not going to go to prison for deciding to leave the military today. So it's a little different. Yeah. Kind of like cooking for the mafia, or, I mean, yeah. Cooking for the mafia, or, it's just, some vocations are uncomfortable and other vocations are over the line. And this one is like, why don't you just get out? The police force is maybe a little different. Maybe there could be some administrative roles on the police force that are more appropriate. I'm not sure. I haven't really thought too carefully about that. But yeah, I think the best thing is to just get out of any kind of role that requires an oath, or wants you to give your allegiance or some portion of your allegiance to your country, to an earthly nation. Just why not? If you're able to, and they're not going to put you to death or something, Why not just get out and, you know? Um, are we responsible for murders when we pay our government taxes to wage war on innocent civilian? Yeah, that's a good question. It's definitely a, a reasonable question to ask. Um, Part of the reason why I don't struggle with that is because Jesus explicitly tells us to render to Caesar that which is Caesar's, in the context of money and paying taxes. And Paul explicitly tells us to pay taxes and or affirms that Christians pay taxes. So, when we pay taxes as citizens of whatever earthly government that we're a part of, what that government does with that money is up to them. A lot of it's going to go to healthcare and public services and paying politicians and various government programs that they think are going to be helpful. Some of them are going to go to war. Obviously, a lot of it's going to, some portion of it's going to go to war, and that's not under our control. So I get the objection there, if it is an objection, but. So let's see. What else? There are jobs like working at a convenience store on a military base. I don't know about it. Yeah, that's something that's maybe, that feels like a little bit of a different category, there's all kinds of jobs that start to feel really uncomfortable when you're a disciple and you're learning to obey all Jesus commanded and you're trying to put his principles into practice. I used to work at a hotel. I was a valet at a hotel, and there were two things that started to bother me. One was that the immodesty of the uniform I had to wear, and the second thing that was bothering me was that I was trying to get tips, from rich folks who would come to the hotel, and I'm supposed to go up, I'm supposed to take their luggage up to their room, and then I'm supposed to be really nice and friendly and tell them where are the best restaurants around town, where can they go have a great time, where can they go blow a couple $100 tonight, having a great time. And I started to realize this is weird, this is, I should be warning these people, about the dangers of riches, not telling them how they can go misuse their riches, And so I just started to realize I don't think I should do this anymore. But there was a period of time where I was still doing that job, and it started to, something started to feel not right, and then after a couple of months, it was like, I might need to go. Some jobs are, then I went to landscaping, and that felt pretty clean at first. But then, then it's like you end up at someone's got this really big house and this really big lawn, and there you are, manicuring their lawn and shaping up their hedges and, making their property look really unnecessarily nice. And you're like, this is a little weird too, but that was something that I could live with, that was something that wasn't over the line for me, Now a lot of what I do is working for, I just got off on a big rabbit trail. I'm sorry. Let's see. What are we? Yeah. Thanks for the question, Sonny. Are you Sonny? It's like Sonny, the Sonny I know in Pittsburgh. That's you, right? Yeah. Hello, Sonny. What's your stance on head coverings versus face coverings? as well as I've seen the early fathers hold the face covers for women, not only head covers. Yeah, I thought about that a little bit the last couple of months. Um, I know that there were early church writers who held to face covering. I've heard someone say all of them did. It was unanimous. I kind of have a hard time believing that. When Tertullian talks about it, he seems to clearly indicate that not all Christian women cover their faces. He says that the women of Arabia who were not Christians will be your judges, which indicate that not all the women in the church believe that. And he distinguishes between covering the head and the face. I guess some people say when Paul says cover your head, he means cover your face. But Tertullian in his writing says, he distinguishes, he said, don't, that some people don't just cover their head, but their face also. So he makes that distinction. But, when I look at the Bible, I don't see face coverings there. I don't see face veils. I'm not saying that it wasn't something that was done. What I mean is it doesn't appear that it was something that women were doing all the time outdoors. So for example, in Genesis 12, Abraham and Sarai in Egypt, somehow they're going to Egypt, and somehow Abram knows that they're going to know you're a beautiful woman. And so tell them you're my sister. Well, how are they going to know she's a beautiful woman if she's covering her face all the time when she's outside? Doesn't make sense. Later on, Rebecca, is it Rebecca or Rachel? The one that Isaac marries, is that Rebecca? That was Rebecca. Yeah, Rebecca. Abraham sends his servant to get a wife for Isaac, and as Rebecca is coming back with the servant and the other servants who were with him, she sees Isaac coming, and she says to the servant, who is that? And he says, that's the guy. And it says, Rebecca then got her veil and covered. So she covers she's on the road with these guys, and she's not covered. She's talking to this guy. She's not covered. She sees Isaac. She goes and gets the veil. So it had something to do, some kind of nuptial veil, something to do with, she didn't want him to see her before the wedding or something like that. Another passage is with Tamar, Judah and Tamar. Judah thinks Tamar is a prostitute because she's got her face covered, which is interesting. And obviously Judah knows what she looks like. He's able to recognize her, Then you think about Esther. Was Esther covering her face? How did they know she was so beautiful? It seems pretty straightforward that Esther was not covering her face. New Testament doesn't really, there are a couple of passages that are interesting, like, the woman who washes Jesus' feet with her tears and wipes them with her hair. Kind of hard to imagine she's wearing a face veil. How did the people, when she came in, how is it that the people knew who she was? How is it that she was recognized as a sinful woman in that region if the women are all wearing face veils? How would you recognize any women? And again, in 1 Corinthians 11, Paul doesn't use the word prosopone. He uses the word kephale, head. And, anyway, so those are some thoughts. Yeah, I mean, it's something that I'm, you know, could find out more about. It looks like there were some early Christians who were really serious about this, but um, it's not something that I feel the need to take a really firm stance on, or like focus on too much, because there's only one passage in the New Testament that deals with head covering, doesn't say anything about covering the face. And it's not the kind of thing that I sense the Spirit of God would want us to be contentious about or focus on too much. Um, not that it isn't important, it's in there, but I can't imagine he would want the church splitting over, should we cover the head or the whole face. Uh, but yeah, I mean, if it's really true that all the early Christians who write about it say women should cover their faces, um, and that would that would be that would be that would be a big deal. That would be something that I'd have to stop and think about that and be like, well, what do I do with that? I can't just ignore it. Um, yeah. So anyway, those are my thoughts on the face covering. I think it's important to. Um, I don't mean to say that we shouldn't take the head covering seriously. And if a woman wants to cover her face, praise the Lord, nothing wrong with that. Um, I don't mean to suggest that the head covering is not important. Uh, I I just think there's enough ambiguity in the scripture for me to be lenient about this. And if someone is zealous, obedient to Christ, walking in humility and the fear of the Lord, and they feel like the head covering is only for during prayer or uh, something like that, I mean, yeah, I'm not gonna excommunicate somebody over that, Uh, yeah. Well, what else? Anybody join here that's a recent new subscriber? You got any questions, concerns about the content on my channel? You want to talk about it? Um, by the way, I know a group of very zealous people who honestly believe the head covering is the woman's hair. I don't think that they're correct about that, but they take it very seriously. The women will not cut their hair. They grow their hair long. They won't put their hair up. They try to use their hair as a covering. They're very modest. They're very simple in their lifestyle. They're very serious about the commands of Jesus, and they're sincere. So not gonna not gonna call them heretics or something. I'm not gonna. I can have fellowship with people like that, even though I think they're incorrect about that. Uh, you must cover, but over the exact way it's not worth. Yeah, I agree. Oh man, I don't know what the apostles would tell us, and I'm not confident enough about it to cause division over it. So yes, anybody here who has any other questions? I abide in the word, but I don't believe in his sinless perfection doctrine. Yeah, I don't believe in sinless perfection either. I believe we can be blameless, um, perfect in the biblical sense of being mature. I think there's a general sense in which we can be like Christ, godly, spotless, but I uh, don't think that means that we attain the sinless perfection of Jesus. Although I'm open to the possibility that someone could get there, or at least very near there, you know, uh, maybe when they're in their 80s, like the Apostle John, and they've been following Jesus for decades, and they're just so thoroughly, you know, uh, intimate with him that, there's almost nothing else to sanctify, but um, or nothing else to strengthen or to grow, could be, but I'm not there. The Shepherd of Hermas. Okay, what about the Shepherd of Hermas, my friend? Was I able to read the Shepherd of Hermas and come to conclusions? Can come to conclusions about what? Yeah, it's very hard to find people, Jimmy. I'd be happy to introduce you to some people. There's an online Bible study that I could hook you up with, where you can meet some guys. Where do you live, by the way? Yeah, Devin, that was what I was. That was the beginning of the video here. Jimmy, you're in Missouri. Do we know any? Do we have any mutual friends or acquaintances? Okay. Well, are there any other topics, questions, issues that anyone feels like we should discuss? Anybody just join who's a new subscriber, recent subscriber, and you got any questions or concerns or objections about any of the content on my channel? If not, how can we get a hold of you when you're not streaming? Do you have socials or give out your? Yeah, here's my number right now. There it is. And here's my email. It's on my YouTube channel, when you read the thing. On the home page there, you just click read more or whatever it is, and it's there, but there it is there too. The shepherd insists that it would be wrong not to take your former wife back if she repents. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. Jimmy, I am 43 years old. I might look a little younger than that because the pixels are not enough to show my wrinkles and my gray hair, but I'm if you could see me in the light, you'd see this guy is in his 40s. Probably over the hill, probably less time in front of me than there is behind me. I'm a blade of grass. We are all like a blade of grass, like a mist here today and gone tomorrow. Thinking about that a lot in this season of life. It's going by very fast. Yeah, you thought I was 35 or maybe 33 because you haven't gotten an up close look at me. You can see when I smile, there's getting these lines around the eyes and getting old. Jane, hello, Jane. That Jesus said the end times events he described would occur within the generation he described. Ah, yes, you have um, this very interesting perspective that we are um, that we are living after. How does it go again? That Jesus, we're living after the millennial reign. You believe, I believe, right? You think we're living after the millennial reign. We're living in that time when Satan is set free for a little bit of time, right, to mess with people. That's what you believe, if I'm not mistaken, Jane. Devin, how do you see when Jesus talks about done bearing 30, some 60? Oh, yeah. Good question. Yeah, I was thinking about that yesterday, actually. Who's horrible at texting, Daniel? Thank you for praying for my wife, Jimmy. Please continue praying for her. Yeah. So yeah, Devin. It's an interesting question. Why do some people produce 30, some 60, some uh, some 100? And you know, it's a little awkward to imagine that he's talking about evangelism, making disciples. Um, I mean, that could include the fruit that is born. uh, but I think it's probably got to do with like, I was thinking the other day, could have something to do with transformation, like the degree to which someone's life is changed. That some people, they come into the church, they sell possessions and give to the poor, they stay married, they pray for their enemies, they're a cheerful, joyful person, who's generous to the poor and gentle and humble, and it just kind of, stops there. They work a job, they have a family, they work full time, and they're salt and light wherever they go, and they're just a faithful follower the rest of their lives, and and maybe others, like, it just goes deeper. It just goes, uh, um, you know, they strive forward in a way that that few do, you know. Something like that. I don't know. It's little, he's not. It's not explicit, but could also have to do with, the relationship between usefulness and faithfulness. Something like that. But yeah, it's interesting. In the parable of the talents, like, what does it mean that one guy had one talent, another guy had two talents, and another guy had five talents? Is that ability? Is that, like, a certain amount of grace God gives you to, like, strive forward and toil and, like, really dig into difficult issues that you might not want to think about, but it just, you become more and more like Christ, while some people just kind of, you know, there's great transformation. They're obedient to his commands. Uh, they're a humble, joyful person, and it just kind of doesn't go beyond that. I don't know. I don't know. It's interesting question. Um, Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you. Um, yeah, Jane. Interesting theory. Interesting theory. Who knows? That would be that would be very interesting if that turned out to be true. I don't believe that, but um, who knows? Thanks for that, Jimmy. I'm not in a great deal of pain about it. I'm joyful. I've got so much to live for, and so much to do, and um, so I'm not in some kind of agony each day. Sometimes it can be tough, but it can be tough for married folks too. If she comes back, I'll have um, other difficulties that I don't have now. So uh, don't think that don't think that I'm like suffering terribly every day or something like that. Very excited to be. It can be difficult. It can be difficult, but it's also very exciting to be able to serve Jesus. Um, so, um, Jane, Jesus' words alone, this generation show it's worth looking. It's a tremendous blessing to know false teachers have put people under mind control. Yeah, I guess I'm sort of I guess I sort of lean towards the partial preterism thing, where everything Jesus says there in Matthew 24 prior to verse, what is it, 36 maybe, he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem there. Um, um, and then everything, let's see, it's yeah. So everything in Matthew 24 verse 1 down to verse 34 is about the fall of Jerusalem. And then he says, truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. That's everything he just said, the fall of Jerusalem. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. Okay, now he's talking about heaven and earth passing away. Now that's way in the future, not the fall of Jerusalem, way in the future. And then he says in verse 36, but concerning that day and hour, heaven and earth passing away, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven nor the Son, but the Father only. Now he's talking about, his second coming to judge the world and wrap it all up. That's kind of how I put that together. So this generation, the generation that was alive at this time, they did not pass away before all these things that happened before, that Jesus talked about before verse 34 happened, the fall of Jerusalem. But then he starts talking about something else in verse 35 onward. Okay, Daniel, I didn't know that. But I listened to a little Steve Gregg about this, and I know Steve Gregg's got some things he teaches that aren't right, and I get that. But I think his view on this is pretty compelling. Yeah. Okay. New covenant is new heaven and new earth. Do you think that there will literally be a new heaven and a new earth, Daniel? Or is it all sort of you're just explaining what they believe. Gotcha. Yeah, the full preterism thing seems untenable. But Jane, about the doctrine, I hope you'll go back and check out the beginning of this video, because I talked about doctrine in the New Testament and how important it is. Like the kind of doctrine that's really important is not, our eschatology or things like that, but it's how we live. And That's really what's the most important to Jesus is, do we put into practice his teachings and not explain them away? We still await the final judgment. We are at Revelation 23. It's not full preterism. Okay. Jimmy, I am not a pastor at a church. I am just some guy. But I have a network of brothers and sisters that I'm a part of, and we all encourage and edify each other. I'm going to be joining a church community soon, that a community of people that's moving in a really beautiful direction. I'm very excited to be a part of it. And there's a number of guys there I'll be joining to, just kind of try to help steer it in the right direction. I don't know. Not sure if that's what I'm supposed to do, but kind of open to whatever God wants to do. If that door opens and it seems like he wants me to do that, then okay. But I'm really happy being on a team of guys. Like to be on a team of guys, and I have been trying to think of a direct, practical application to the eschatology to fit with your emphasis. Eschatology definitely impacts our walk. A lot to explain there. Okay. Yeah, I definitely think that if someone thinks that they're going to be raptured and not have to go through, the tribulation or something, and if they think that Paul taught a different gospel than Jesus or something, then that's going to impact someone's walk for sure. So do I. I have much to learn as well. Well, there's now 16 people here. I think that's the most we've had. Just as we're getting down to the end here, I think. Is anyone who just joined, who's a recent subscriber to my channel, you have any questions, concerns about any of the content on my channel, feel free to put it in the chat box. Who was the we you said watched their video I made? That was me and some wonderful brothers, Sam and Nick. I think you have met Nick before, Nicholas D'Souza. I don't think you have met Sam before. But they both liked it a lot. So, hope for heaven is coming. Hello. All right. Well, any other thing to talk about, or did you have a video on Romans 9? I do not have a video on Romans 9. I don't have a video on Romans 9. That is the answer. I started doing a series on Romans, and the next thing I'm supposed to do is uh, the next thing I'm supposed to do. Good night, Daniel. The next thing I'm supposed to do is Romans 8, the second half of the chapter. Hold on one second. Be right back.
Oh, I got the water, not the pill. Yeah.
Be right back. Be right back. Got some thoughts on Romans 9. Just want to say, per some earlier discussion, it's pretty hard to find a way to earn a living that doesn't involve some kind of compromise. I feel that in healthcare. Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah. Yeah, Romans 9. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I hear you, Jane. I guess there are a few jobs that just feel completely clean. There's nothing, but a lot of jobs, have at least some aspect of them that feels a little, Um, be right back. All right, did I lose a bunch of people? All right, we're still here. Yeah, Romans 9. Oh yeah, the tents Paul made could have been used as brothels. Yeah, who knows? Yeah, I most of what I do for work, what I've been doing for work recently has been working for Wayfair. I put furniture together for Wayfair. So I go around New York City and I show up at people's houses and I put together desks and tables and dressers and uh, stuff like that. But sometimes I put together something that's like, kind of fancy or a vanity, like putting together something that's called a vanity doesn't feel great. It's like there so that this lady can put her makeup on easier or something. Obviously that's not the only thing vanities, it can act as a dresser or a desk or something like that. But anyway, sometimes it just feels a little weird. Yeah, I'm in NYC. I grew up here in Manhattan. Okay, thank you, Rick. Yeah. Yeah, Romans 9. Yeah, it's just, I mean, I don't have any probably don't have anything to share that you haven't heard before if you've been looking into it. But it's just so much. I mean, even from the get-go, you just start reading Romans 9 with a Calvinist lens, and it's like, wait a second, how does this work? Like, Paul wishes he could be accursed for the sake of his brothers. So he wants people to be saved, even though he knows God doesn't want them to be saved, or at least probably doesn't want them to be saved. No, I am not a Calvinist. I am not a Calvinist. I was sort of Calvinistic at one point. Now I think it is completely unbiblical and untenable and illogical and, but yeah, I mean, right there in the beginning of Romans 9, it's like Paul has love for these people who are not saved, and who are, just obstinate and stiff-necked, and he's willing to be cut off for them. So it's like, what, does Paul love these people more than God? God has chosen them for destruction, but Paul wants them to be saved. So like God hates them but Paul loves them. It's just it's so weird, And then you move through the rest of the chapters. It's all this weird stuff, It's, um, yeah, like God being patient with vessels of wrath, is very weird on Calvinism. Like, why would God have to be patient with people who are doing what he ordained them to do? And he's, classical Calvinism, he's meticulously controlling what happens. Everything that happens is ordained. So why would he have to be patient with people who cannot do anything but what he has ordained them to do? That's completely incoherent, I saw this great meme once, a picture. It was sort of like, it was a meme against Calvinism, and in the picture, you see a picture of a man representing God. It's in the Garden of Eden, and then there's Adam and Eve in the garden, and the snake is coming out from the tree, right, and talking to them. But what you can see in the picture is you can see that the snake is really a puppet on God's arm, and um, and underneath it says Calvinism, which is like, okay, the snake is just doing and saying exactly what God ordained him to do, and he can't do anything else. So it's really God who's coming and deceiving Eve. But I think Calvinism is even worse. Like the way it is, my understanding, the way Calvin actually thought of it. This is not how he would articulate it, but I'm just saying it's the inescapable conclusion, is that if you really want to make that picture what reality is really like on Calvinism, God doesn't just have a snake puppet, but Adam and Eve are his puppets too, and there are no real people other than God. Everyone else, all the angels, all the people are just puppets, and there's just one person who's like playing with figures. It's very weird. Very weird. There's no genuine relationship. It's just one person by themselves having these characters that they've thought up, and he's basically pretending like they're making real choices. And it's odd. Obviously, a Calvinist would say that's a gross caricature, straw man, but I don't think it really is. I don't think it really is. I think that is kind of what it boils down to. They've just figured out really, like, more sophisticated, palatable ways to explain it. Some people just give up some of the 5 points because they realize this just doesn't make sense. Anyway, well, I guess I'm gonna sign off unless. Oh, do you feel that hard-heartedness might just be a reluctance to accept God's authoritative word on a subject? Hard-heartedness. I guess. Something like that. Yeah, someone's wants what they want their way. So question, if someone can devote their life to God, be saved, partake in works with and through the Holy Spirit, encounter the Lord, then turn away and willingly turn away and reject him, isn't the only logical explanation that you were never saved? No, I don't think that's the only explanation. I think the scriptures clearly talk about both possibilities, that you can have someone who was never saved. They thought they were, but they never really knew Jesus. They were never obedient to him from the heart. They used his name, but they did not keep his word. They were like the people in John 8 or John 2 who believe in him, but he will not entrust himself to them. They're not loyal to him in a certain kind of way. Once he starts giving his commands and explaining more about who he is, they're like, we don't want anything to do with this. A lot of Christians, I think, are like that. Never really knew him. And the scriptures clearly talk about people who really do come to know him. They get connected to him in a saving way. They have come to know God and to be known by God, but they can fall away. They can be cut off. They can be spit out. They can, be cut off the vine. There really are his servants, but instead of receiving a reward like some of the other servants, they bury their treasure. And he says, "Oh, you wicked, lazy servant." He doesn't say, "Oh, you never were my servant." No, then they're his servant. Galatians 5 is just so explicit about this that, you've got people there throughout Galatians 2, 3, and 4. Paul is explicit that, I'm not mad at you, God and me. I'm not getting mad at you or anything. It's just something that I get excited about. Even if you were, you said, yeah, it wasn't a statement of judgment. I'm just honestly trying to process how that could be the case when you truly come to know him. It's just unfathomable to me. Yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry. Sorry. Preaching to the choir there. Let's see what else. Yeah. How could that happen? How could that happen? Well, Devin's got a good video on that, and he's getting ready. I like referring to converts as making a profession of Christ rather than getting saved, because one, we don't know another's heart, and two, we all aren't saved yet. We all aren't saved yet. Okay. Well, I do see in the scriptures that someone does get saved now, today, but I also see that there is a future aspect or component to that as well, that you can be saved initially. You can come into the dragnet or get on the vine, but then, and you're saved initially, and then you don't end up there in the end. You're not saved in the end. So you have exited the salvation process. But we do see the apostles and Jesus talking about salvation as having occurred, having happened to someone. They have been saved. Right. All right. Well, coming up on 11 p.m. here, coming up on the 2-hour mark. How are you saved and being saved? Initial salvation and final salvation would come. Yeah, like being saved. Getting saved now. Like initially, someone says, like think of the vine and the branches, God and me. Once someone becomes a branch in Christ, they can say, I'm on the vine. The question is, are they going to be on the vine later? And if they bear fruit, if they continue in this saving relationship, this saving connection with Jesus, then they will, if they obey his commandments, then they will be helped by God to bear more fruit, and they will remain on the vine. They will remain saved, and eventually they will enter the kingdom once and for all at the end, and that salvation process will be over and it will be eternal. But if someone does not continue in obedience, at some point they are severed from the vine and they have disconnected from that saving connection to Jesus, and they have not remained in right relationship with God. I got you, Jane. You can also look at the Israelites in the Old Testament. They were saved from Egypt, led by Christ, but only 2 entered the promised land, saved in the past, but not saved in the future. Yeah. 1 Corinthians 10. Great passage for that. Well, anybody else got any? I guess I just kind of have to stop asking that, right? If we're gonna go, we're just gonna go. But if there's anybody who's joined recently, last couple minutes you joined, you got any questions or concerns about any of the content on my channel, you want to ask or say something, or feel free. Probably winding down here. Gonna go in a couple of minutes. All right. Thank you, my friend Jimmy. Nice to cyber meet you. Thank you for your comments and your encouragement and your support. Thank you so much, Rick. God bless you, my friend. All right. Ending the live stream. Unless anyone says something that just has to be discussed, ending the live stream in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2. Good night, everybody. Oh, wait. Devin had a question. I had a question. Saw it. No, what was the question? Thank you so much, Jane. Well, now it's awkward, Devin. I was just about to there was closure. Everyone had said goodnight. It was all over. And now, just kidding. Now it's really getting awkward. Everyone's saying goodbye. I didn't see the question, Devin. What was the question? Oh, when talking to other Christians about wealth or worldliness, what do you look for before saying something, and where do you get that standard? When talking to other Christians about wealth or worldliness, what do you look for before saying something, and where do you get that standard? Most now that I think about it, Devin, most of my conversations about that don't start because I'm observing someone's life. I don't bring that up with people because I see something in their life that concerns me, although sometimes that does happen. But I usually just bring it up with people because it was such an important part of Jesus' message. So I'm going to bring it up, in conversation with people who I'm just getting to know, whether I see anything concerning or not, But yeah, then as I'm getting to know someone, I end up at their house or whatever, I get a feel, I might then encourage them, hey, think seriously about what Jesus said regarding wealth and possessions and how you use it. Which can sometimes be a little awkward, but depends on the individual, but usually that issue comes up, whether I see anything or not. And part of the reason why I often bring it up, whether I see anything or not, is because I know that most people, and especially in this culture, it's a big blind spot. They might be tithing, they might, do some good here and there, but it's never occurred to them that they should actually sell possessions and give to the poor, or that storing up for retirement could be putting their souls at risk. And or a lot of people in our culture think they're poor and they're actually rich, and they think they're poor because they're poor in comparison to the rich people in this culture. Yeah. Okay, Jane. Yeah, when it comes to like at what point do you cut somebody off? Yeah, I think if someone is if someone is accumulating possessions, like as they move through life, they are getting another better, nicer house and a summer house, and rather than like living a simple, modest life, they're accumulating and they're gaining more and more and more. And you talk to them and you're like, do you realize that you're not living the life of a disciple, you're living the American dream? And if they're just abstinent, or obstinate, don't want to listen, then I'm not going to take communion with them, or if someone's, saving up for retirement and their intention is to stop working one day and, take it easy. And, I'm going to, if I know that about them and I talk to them about that and I know that they are still doing that, I'm not going to take communion with them. I guess I just bring it up. I just bring it up with pretty much everybody because I know it's something that we all got to think about, and if I bring it up in a more here's something Jesus said that we all got to keep on our radar here, rather than let me bring this up with you in particular because I see a problem with you. There's a time for that, obviously, but usually it's best to just talk about his commandments, because he talked about them. And so they should be on our mind. Whatever he talked about all the time, we should be thinking about and talking about all the time. And the wealth thing is something he talked about all the time. It's all over the place. Also, telling our own story is good. Telling a story about what God has done in our lives. Here's what God did to me. That's a good way of getting it on someone's radar. Obviously, bling, chains, nice Rolex watches, is or like luxury vehicles, really like, over the top fancy clothes, things like that, or even just like, obviously expensive clothing. Those are the kind of things that eventually, somewhat early on, I'll start talking to somebody about if I see that, as long as I feel like they have a good grasp of what the gospel is. If they don't have a grasp of that, if they're still deceived by the sort of faith alone, grace alone, eternal security thing, then I'm not sure how much sense it makes to focus too much on those things. Maybe sometimes, but a lot of time it's probably helpful to help someone get a grasp of what the gospel actually is and what it requires of us first, so that when you do bring those things up, they're actually sober-minded about it and they're more willing to take it seriously. All right, now I'm really going to go. Good night, everyone. May God bless you all. May God help us to be ready to stand before the Son of Man when the time comes, which could be soon. Oh, God in me says, so no faith alone. Oh, you're kidding. Okay, you're kidding. Okay. All right. Good night, everyone.